Picture this. Versailles, August 1715, the richest palace in Europe, where golden mirrors reflected the glow of a king who called himself the sun. Yet inside the Mercury room, that light was fading. The most powerful monarch of his age, Louis XIV of France, lay dying. His body, once paraded as a symbol of divine power, was rotting from the feet up. For 22 days, Louis remained conscious as gangrene consumed him. He could smell his own flesh decaying. Surgeons pushed their fingers through his leg, and the stench of death filled Versailles so thickly that courtiers gagged, fainted, and fled. No battlefield wound, no assassin's dagger, but something slower, crueler, his own body eating itself alive. This was not how kings were meant to die. Louis XIV, who had ruled longer than any monarch in European history, who built Versailles as a monument to his glory, who declared, "L'État c'est moi, I am the state," ended not as a god but as a rotting man. And the story I'm about to tell you of the final 22 days of the Sun King is darker, more grotesque, and more revealing than any legend. He ruled like a god, but died like any man.
To understand the horror of his death, we must first understand the myth of Louis XIV. For 72 years he reigned, longer than any king in European history. He transformed France into the most powerful nation on the continent. He built Versailles, a palace so vast and dazzling that it became a symbol of royal absolutism. Every morning began with the lever du roi, the king's rising, a ritual where nobles competed for the honor of handing him his stockings or pouring his wine. Every action was theater, designed to remind his subjects that their world revolved around him, as planets circled the sun. That is why they called him the Roi Soleil, the Sun King. Louis believed his power was absolute, granted by God himself. He once famously said, "L'État c'est moi, I am the state." To him, France and the monarchy were one and the same. His wars reshaped Europe. His court dictated fashion, art, and etiquette. His palace at Versailles became the very stage of kingship, a place where hundreds of nobles lived not as independent lords but as carefully choreographed courtiers orbiting their sovereign. But behind the gold, behind the ritual, there was a man of flesh and blood. A man who aged. A man whose body, like all bodies, was vulnerable to rot. And in the summer of 1715, that vulnerability appeared as a small, dark spot on his leg after a hunting trip. To his physicians, it was nothing. To Louis, it was an inconvenience. To history, it was the beginning of a nightmare. All the gold of Versailles could not buy him a painless death. August 10, 1715. Louis XIV was 76 years old, astonishingly old for a king in the early 18th century. That morning, he rode out hunting at Marly, his favorite escape from the suffocating etiquette of Versailles. He spent hours in the saddle, laughing with his courtiers, looking every bit the monarch who still claimed to embody the strength of France. But on the way home, something shifted. A sharp, stabbing pain struck his left leg above the knee. At first, it was nothing unusual. Louis had endured countless aches from age, war, and gout. He dismissed it, as did his physicians. That evening, his chief doctor, Guy Crescent Fagan, looked at the leg and declared it sciatica. A bit of rest, some poultices, and all would be well. After all, who could imagine the Sun King, who had survived wars, rebellions, and conspiracies, brought down by something so small? But the pain did not fade. It grew sharper, burning like a torch pressed to his skin. On August 13th, a valet noticed something terrifying, a black spot, no bigger than a coin, just above the knee. Fagan waved it away, saying it was merely bruising. He told the king not to worry. But Louis was worried. And he had reason to be. That black spot was necrosis, tissue death. The first visible sign of senile gangrene, a condition in which blood flow to the limbs fails and flesh begins to die. The king's leg was already starting to rot. The black spot that foretold the king's death. At Versailles, appearances mattered more than truth. Louis XIV had spent 70 years projecting strength, wealth, and divine power. To reveal weakness was unthinkable. And so, even as the pain grew unbearable, he continued his daily rituals. On August 15th, the Feast of the Assumption, the king attended Mass, Witnesses later described his face as gray, his lips tinged with blue. He gripped the arm of his chair so hard his knuckles turned white. But he refused to sit. The Sun King would not show weakness before his court. By then, the smell had already begun. Those close to him noticed a sweet, cloying odor, the smell of rotting flesh. Courtiers discreetly pressed perfumed handkerchiefs to their noses. Madame de Maintenon, his secret wife, later confessed that she could barely sit in the same room. But the doctors insisted it was nothing. Fagan prescribed opium mixed with wine, but it dulled neither the pain nor the smell. He still insisted it was sciatica, even as the black spot spread and the king's legs swelled like a grotesque sausage. It was denial. Denial by the doctors, denial by the courtiers, denial even by the king himself. To admit the truth was to admit that the Sun King, who had ruled longer than anyone in Europe's history, was mortal. But the truth could not be hidden much longer. By August 17th, 4 of the most celebrated doctors in France examined the leg. They saw purple and black flesh, skin cracking and oozing foul liquid. They whispered in Latin, mortification, putrefaction. The king's leg was rotting before their eyes. And yet, their remedy was no remedy at all. Donkey milk baths, camphorated spirits, and of course, bleeding, as if draining blood from a dying 76-year-old would somehow halt the advance of death. The Sun King was beginning his final descent. Versailles smelled of perfume and death. By late August 1715, Versailles had become a palace of whispers. Everyone knew the truth, though few dared to say it aloud. The King of France was rotting alive. His leg had turned purple and black, the flesh splitting in places like overripe fruit. The stench, sweet, putrid, unbearable, clung to his bedchamber and spread down the gilded halls. And yet Louis XIV lived. He endured. Hour after hour, day after day, he lingered in agony. Doctors cut open the sores to release the corruption, only to watch more foul liquids seep out. They applied boiling poultices and sharp instruments, driving the king to cry out so loudly that courtiers flinched outside the chamber. At night, he begged for sleep. At dawn, he asked for mass. His priests prayed over him, reminding him that his suffering was God's trial. But those closest to him later admitted, his cries were not holy. They were screams of pain, the sound of flesh being eaten away. In one last attempt, surgeons suggested amputation of the leg. But Louis, lying pale and shaking in his sheets, refused. A king of France does not die like a peasant on a butcher's block. He is reported to have whispered, better to rot whole than to be cut apart. So he endured. And Versailles, that palace of mirrors, became a palace of shadows. Courtiers moved silently, their faces pale. Some fled, unable to bear the sight or the smell. Yet others pressed closer, waiting, calculating. For every day the king lingered in agony was one more day to maneuver for favor, one more chance to shape the succession. The Sun King had built Versailles to project eternal glory. But now it reeked of death. September 1st, 1715. The dawn broke pale and grey over Versailles. Inside the royal bedchamber, the longest reign in European history was drawing to an end. Louis XIV's face was sunken, his skin waxen, his eyes glassy with fever. His leg was now nothing more than a mass of blackened flesh, crawling with infection. He had stopped eating days earlier. His body was wasting, though the stench of gangrene made it seem heavier than ever. Around him gathered the great figures of France, princes, dukes, bishops, and his young great-grandson, the future Louis XV, only 5 years old. The dying king beckoned the child close. Witnesses swore his words were chilling. Do not imitate me in my love of war. Try to remain at peace with your neighbors. I have loved too much what ought not to be loved. And then, as the priests whispered prayers, Louis spoke again. I thought myself immortal. I was mistaken. At 8:15 in the morning, after 72 years on the throne, Louis XIV, the Sun King, the most powerful monarch France had ever known, gasped once, shuddered, and went still. His courtiers wept. But beneath the tears, there was relief. The agony was over, for the king, and for those who had endured the sickening spectacle of his last weeks. The man who had declared, "L'état, c'est moi, I am the state," had finally fallen. And in the end, the state was left not with light, but with the smell of decay. Louis XIV built an image of immortality. His court called him the Sun King, the light of Europe, the man whose power touched every corner of the continent. Yet in his final weeks, his body betrayed him more completely than any enemy ever had. His gangrene was not just a disease, it was a symbol. Absolute power cannot protect flesh from rot. Gold, glory, and palaces of marble crumble against the truth of human decay. Historian François Bluch once wrote, "Louis XIV wanted to be both God and man, eternal and mortal. In the end, his body resolved the contradiction. What Versailles tried to hide, the stench, the agony, the screams, was the same truth hidden in every empire. Behind the masks of majesty lie fragile bodies, frail as any peasants. The court told the world of a serene and dignified passing. But the real death was humiliation, a reminder that even kings rot. Gold cannot mask the smell of decay." Modern doctors now believe Louis XIV's death was made worse by primitive medicine. Today, gangrene can be treated with antibiotics, even amputation, and survival is possible. In 1715, it was a sentence worse than death, a slow burning of the flesh, an agony no crown could shield against. The French philosopher Voltaire reflected bitterly on the reign, saying, "The king died as he had lived, surrounded by grandeur, yet prisoner to his own illusions." And perhaps that is the echo we feel today. Every age builds its Versailles, its illusions of permanence, its monuments to power. But the lesson of Louis XIV is carved not in marble, but in flesh, beneath the robes, beneath the crowns, even the brightest suns set in darkness. No one told you the Sun King died not in glory, but in rot. If this story left you as shocked as it left me, leave a comment below. Tell me what part of Louis XIV's final days horrified you the most. And if you want to uncover more hidden truths of history, subscribe to the channel. Your subscription helps me bring these dark, forgotten stories back to light.